Good afternoon again, members, and to our witness, Mr. Castro. Prior to going on recess, several members sought clarification on possible violations of companies that have uh, may may employ more than 250 employees or make more than or have received more than 10 million in receipts. But just to follow up on that question that I brought up earlier, my question to you, Mr. Castro, is what will be the process to recoup awards in the event that the panel or the awardee may have been in violation of that established requirement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. I'm not aware of any mechanism to recoup funds should that occur, as you described.
So you wouldn't know if the company would be in violation or if the panel had made a decision that was in violation.
I am not aware of the panel or any applicant having violated any statute, rule, or regulation.
But how would you determine that if that was one of your requirement or one of the requirement for the awards being given to these companies?
It's my position that that would be discerned from the packet or what may otherwise be discerned through conversation among the panelists. But that's what I can submit to the best of my recollection, Mr. Chairman.
But when you listed the 5 items that had to get clearance before being forwarded to the review panelists, there's nothing on there that would even indicate that a company may be receiving more than 10 million in receipts. And so
I don't disagree with the statement, sir. I will say, Mr. Chairman, if I may, that any and all decisions relative to the disposition of a particular application is decided collectively by the panel.
thank you for that. At this time, I recognize the co-chair.
Follow up to the chairman's question one. So it would be a collective decision to recoup, to make decisions to recoup any funds from the applicant if it was found to be in violation of anything. Any regulations you may have, or is that your testimony today?
Not exactly. My testimony, my earlier statement to the presiding officer was that any decisions regarding the advancement of an application for further consideration is made collectively by the panel. But if I could just offer, just kind of present my thoughts on this matter, that goes into uncharted territory. I don't I don't recall having been in a discussion about the potentiality of a particular applicant having violated one or more provisions of either the rules or local or federal statute. As one member of a panel, based on my experiences, I would have to assume that legal counsel, perhaps in this case of the administrator, would best advise the panel and the administrator on how best to proceed if in fact it's been determined that a violation had occurred. But admittedly, ma'am, to the best of my recollection, this would be uncharted territory for myself. I can't speak for my colleagues.
Well, it's not necessarily violation of statute or law, federal, local. Could be a regulation. Say, what if an applicant was paid twice inadvertently
Yes, ma'am.
or by deliberation,
Yes, ma'am.
by deliberate,
So if I could shed some light on that.
would it be a collective decision then to recoup?
So I would have to assume so, yes. But if I can share from
Is
one,
there anything on the regulations that you guys have promulgated to address that?
not to the best of my recollection, ma'am.
Okay. What was the justification for bypassing procurement regulations?
I'm not aware personally of any bypassing of any procurement regulations. In the instance of, Madam Chair, could you give me a specific instance? I'm not, you're talking about in the selection of a particular contractor as an example?
In any part of this program?
I
But yeah,
would,
contractors too included.
sure,
Who made the decision and what was the justification to bypass procurement regulations or statutes?
I am not aware. What I can state for the record is I'm a member of the panel, and I'm not an authorized official to make any decisions for and on behalf of the panel, the administrator, or on behalf of the executive branch of the office of the governor.
Well, I'm asking you as to your personal knowledge.
I am not aware of, I know who the, to the best of my knowledge, I know who the authorized officials are to make certain decisions. The administrator of the Boost program would be the Bank of Saipan. The authorized, um, I think the only other person aside
So
from the
what you're trying to tell us now is that the onus to bypass procurement regulations rests on the administrator of the Boost program. Is that correct?
no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there, to the best of
So
my
whose
knowledge,
decision was it to bypass local procurement regulations?
first of all, I'm not aware of bypassing any regulations. And second, I don't know
So
who.
you're not aware that the threshold to award a sole source contract is 50,000. You're not aware of that.
Admittedly, to the best of my knowledge, not in this instance to a subgrantee, ma'am. No, I am not fully aware and apprised of the specificity of those guidelines governing subgrantees. Not to the best of my knowledge. My role is limited to participating on the panel.
You mentioned subgrantees, so you are aware that a subcontractor was awarded a $50,000 contract. Is that correct?
No, that's not what I said. I said I'm not familiar with
Well,
the
you mentioned a subcontractor. I never mentioned anything about a subcontractor.
no,
I was just asking about procurement rules.
okay. May I respond?
Sure.
Okay. So when we're talking about bypassing procurement, my assumption is when I'm referring in the specific instance of the Bank of Saipan serving as the administrator, my operational assumption is that they are a subgrantee of these funds. That's my understanding. Now, I could be grossly off course here, but I'm providing, admittedly, what is my understanding, and I could be off, ma'am.
Mhm.
Again, I will remind members of the body that I'm not a non authorized official in these respects, but simply offering my thoughts as a member of the panel.
Fair enough. Okay. I will continue with the questioning. You earlier stated prior to the lunch break that you had no family or friends who applied for and received boost grants. On the occasions that you did recuse yourself, what were your reasons for recusal?
To be clear, I stated that I am unaware of any members of my family by filial lineage relationship having applied for and or been awarded a boost grant.
Okay.
With respect to your question about under what circumstances would I have removed myself from an applicant, during the break, I was advised again by counsel specifically on two issues. First, to refrain from speaking on any specific application, applicant, party to an application, or on any deliberations that I may have participated in individually, but to emphasize to the body that any and all decisions made on an application were decided collectively by the panel.
Okay. I'm not asking about any particular applicant. I'm simply asking on the occasions that you did recuse yourself. I'm not asking for an applicant, a particular applicant, but on the occasions that you did recuse yourself, what was your reason for recusal? I'm not asking about the collective panel review decision. It's your personal recusal. On what occasions and
Sure.
what was your reason for
Because
recusing yourself?
because my because my rationale and or deliberations on a are related to the review of one or more applications, I am not liberty under legal guidance to speak to that issue, ma'am.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I have been advised by legal counsel not to speak to my actions or any thoughts related to the deliberations affiliated with any particular application.
Your
Anything.
counsel
Yes, ma'am.
has advised you not to say anything about your actions. You just said your actions. Your counsel advised you?
My individual actions, yes, ma'am. On any particular application.
I'm not asking about a particular application.
You're asking about
In
my.
general, you have mentioned that you recused yourself.
I, I did not use the term recuse, but I had mentioned specifically for the record on 2 occasions that I had elected not to comment.
But you
During the
also
review,
said that was a recusal.
I don't.
When Representative Tina asked you before lunch, would you say that that is then a recusal? You replied in the affirmative.
If to refrain from commenting could be interpreted as a recusal, and I didn't leave the room was the follow-up question. But again, generally speaking, and not in any specific instance, uh, in any other discussion outside of Boost, if there was a direct conflict of interest, I would take it upon myself to recuse myself. Yes.
So what was your reason for that?
For which, ma'am?
For recusing yourself or electing? What was your reason for electing not to opine and comment or?
In a review of an application or
Yes,
in the course of my
in the
profession?
general review of applications?
I
What
am
was your reason?
I am not at liberty to speak to any discussions on any actions related to any applications. So I would assume, based on legal counsel, I don't have him here, but I'm sure if we took a break and brought him in, he could probably articulate that further. I even, to my understanding, this exceeds, my basic understanding of the realm of law. But I've been advised not to speak on my individual course of action related to any particular application or all of them in general. I have to take that in general. Now, if you're asking me as a matter of philosophy outside of the realm of a Boost, I could tell you how I would normally typically operate.
Well, please do enlighten us
Sure.
based on
So,
your personal philosophy. Why
sure,
would you recuse yourself?
sure, absolutely. So, there have been times in my professional career where I had the privilege to vote on an issue, let's say a law, or on the selection of a particular employee who may be directly related to me. I can't recall what specific instance, but I know that this is how I would operate and how I believe I have in the past. And if there was a direct conflict of interest, uh, that I would recuse myself from those proceedings. And I can't recall exactly when I served as a member of the Guam legislature, but I have recused myself on more than one occasion from directly participating in a vote.
Okay, so based on that personal philosophy, wouldn't
Yes.
you say that applies to your role as a review panel on this Boost
Yes,
program?
if any member of my immediate family was in fact an applicant and I was aware of that, I would have taken it upon myself to recuse myself. Yes, ma'am. If that were the case, I am not
Point of
aware of
order.
that having. Yes, ma'am.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I think that Chairwoman Babata's question is very clear and very direct. And, the question is, what were the reasons for his recusals? And I would like to ask that the witness be directed to answer the question. I'm not hearing an answer to the question. And I'm not hearing, for that matter, either any legal basis for why he would refuse to answer such a simple question.
Counsel, is there any way that you can explain to the witness how this does not tie in with advice from his counsel? His response to co-chair's question.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to give Mr. Castro any legal advice, but I can tell you, Mr. Castro, that from what I've heard, you haven't cited any particular legal privilege or any kind of legal basis other than, correct me if I'm wrong, you've been advised by your counsel not to speak on any particular applications. And that alone won't be sufficient to respond to the question. And if you could kindly provide the actual legal basis for the claim of privilege, I'm putting words in your mouth, I understand that. We can address that claim of privilege. And if you're just going to stick to my counsel told me that it would be unwise to speak to a specific application, I don't necessarily think the chairwoman's question is asking you. It's not eliciting any response on a particular application. I think you can be a little bit more direct,
Sure.
with all due respect, and either cite a legal privilege or be more direct in answering the question.
May I?
Thank you.
With all due respect, you're asking me to provide a legal citation for which I don't have the expertise. But if I can restate for the record concisely that I've been advised under counsel on more than one occasion by both the governor's legal counsel and private counsel that had been authorized by the Office of the Attorney General not to do two particular things. Now, maybe I verbalize it wrong, but I'll follow up with a reasonable request hereafter. First, not to speak to any particular application. Second, not to speak to my deliberations or actions tied to any particular or all application. So there's the action part, and then there's the object part. I'm not a lawyer or counselor, but I think it would be reasonable for me at this point in time, and in my best interest, to ask that I be given the opportunity to call a lawyer, which is my legal right, to find out what exactly this citation. I might even be able to hand you the phone, and a counsel can talk to counsel. If I had the citation and the rationale, I give it to you. Here's what I do know: is I want to fully cooperate, and I want to make sure that I don't unnecessarily jeopardize myself because I'm guessing. I don't want to guess. I want to be definitive and factual and honest and open in all instances, but under adequate legal protection as well as advised. And if you could, I'd like to take a minute. We can attempt to call Mr. Gill over or Mr. Thompson over about that particular guidance, or any other lawyer who's on my side to protect my interest. Other than that, I don't know how else to satisfy the question other than to use the example that I provided in general.
Thank you, counsel. Thank you, Mr. Castro. At this time, we'll take a 5-minute recess. We'll take a 5-minute recess. All right, members, we now rise back from recess, and at this time, I will recognize the co-chair to proceed with their question.
Again, Mr. Castro, prior to the recess, I was asking you questions that on occasions that you have recused yourself, what were your reasons for doing so?
Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman. I appreciate the frank discussion offline and in discussion with others. I appreciate you recognizing the fact that I wanted to protect myself from civil suit. In good faith and in the spirit of cooperation, I'll go ahead and ask the general question. In instances where I had refrained from commenting, and I do agree it could be interpreted as having recused myself, it would be based on my own value system that there may be a perceived, not necessarily factual perception of a direct conflict of interest wherein a member of my family may be applying or someone close to that may be applying for a boost award. And I just didn't want that on my shoulders. I wanted to have a degree of removal from that conversation to be accused of having been a party to approving an application, although, just the perception was my threshold, ma'am. I hope I answered that. It's a, it's under those circumstances that I would recuse myself, especially if it was a direct member of my family, immediate family, sister, brother. But in any of these cases, I have not come across any of them, but they're people close to me by perception, and I wanted to protect their interests as well as mine.
I'm sorry, you did recuse yourself, remove yourself from the decision when that occasion came up, when somebody who is closely related to someone around you, immediate,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, thank you.
Thank you for understanding.
At this time, I recognize the vice chair.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Castro, just for the record, did you recuse yourself as a panel member when the Bank of Saipan application came to you for review?
I don't believe so, ma'am. And could I go back to the original question? Remember, there was a question about who reviewed their initial submission, and the record should be able to reflect. And I didn't go back; I didn't have enough time to go back. But everybody should know that the record should reflect that their submission is also time stamped. And I failed to remember. I'm gonna tell you frankly, of course, that I failed to remember that I really right when we broke. I had I was thinking. I think they were among the first to have submitted a completed application. Um, and of course, we would have had to review and discuss it as a panel. So I just want to make that clear that to the best of my recollection, it's not that I didn't review. It's just I couldn't recall it as quickly as I needed to. There are 1,500 apps, but then it came back to me that they were one of the more earnest ones. To your specific question, again, I was advised not to comment on my actions on a particular application. But in the spirit of good faith and cooperation, to the best of my knowledge and recollection, I don't believe I recused myself from supporting the panel's collective recommendation to advance it to the governor for his approval.
Thank you for that answer. Did you not think maybe it could be perceived as conflict of interest since they are the administrators of the Boost program?
Um, no, personally I didn't. No. The short answer is no. I think all applicants should have opportunity to be weighed against the merit. I don't have a direct conflict of interest with the bank. I think I established that when you asked me about Mr. Arroyo. So there was no direct, I don't even think perceived conflict of interest in my part in participating in the discussion. So no, the short answer is not to the best of my knowledge and recollection. Do I recall having recused myself? And I am not aware of any conflict of interest, perceived or real, with the Bank of Saipan.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I have another follow-up question regarding the recouping of funds. So in your earlier statement, you stated that there was no mechanism in place to recoup any funds should there be any errors in distributing the checks. So for instance, if an applicant was awarded erroneously or inadvertently awarded, let's say, an applicant that who's not registered in the CNMI but outside of CNMI? I mean, what are you saying? There's just we're not gonna go after those companies who applied and were given money to repay back those monies that we gave them?
No, ma'am. Actually, I was saying that I am not aware of a mechanism that does exist. I'm sure there's one legally, but I am not aware of one internally or externally where not the panel, but
I
the
mean, but the
government in this
program
case.
itself,
Yeah,
right? When you guys were having these discussions and putting the process together,
sure.
did you guys not anticipate that there were going to be errors, occurring? And if they did, like, what would you have in place to try and recoup those funds? For instance, if there were duplicate payments inadvertently, right? I mean, how were you going to ask these people to return those funds back, or just let them have it, or?
Um, for me, I would defer to the administrator on how best to recoup that through their formal mechanisms. As a member of the panel, I don't recall having an active conversation about how to litigate or otherwise recoup using that example. But let's assume for a minute that did happen. I would advise, actually, I don't even know if that's the panel's role, but I would think that legal counsel to the bank, who's the administrator, and counsel to the government would exhaust all avenues of recovering those monies. I think professionally, personally, it's beyond the scope of the panel. The question I think is appropriate for the panel would be, did we discuss it? And I know we've thought about it. That's why we had certain stop gaps, but I didn't think that there would be overt attempts to defraud the government. First of all, you have to be legally registered in the Commonwealth to even get the business license. So we're hoping that that was a good baseline to start. Um, and that's clearly stipulated. Now, if they had lied, okay, I wouldn't know how to
And
handle
that's
that.
not
No, I
where I
know,
was
I
going
know.
with that.
I
I'm
understand.
saying inadvertently, right? Like
Yes, ma'am.
there are errors that are made
Sure.
made, and so in instances such as that, where where the reviewers or the administrator were reviewing and just it was an oversight, right? Things like that do happen.
Yes, ma'am.
What was the protocol, to recoup those funds, or even just duplicate payments?
Sure. I, I probably, I think the administrator would be the best person, but I think I had that happen once where a deposit was made in another I'm sorry, this has nothing to do with Boost, but a deposit was made in another William M. Castro account and erroneously, and they had taken it back out because the bank's position was it was erroneous deposit. It was never theirs to begin with, and therefore they recovered and put it in my account. So I would think that there's a similar mechanism. But honestly, ma'am, um, I, 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 I don't believe I have a sufficient answer to your question, and I apologize.
So if you don't, who would?
I would defer to the administrator of the Boost program.
Okay. Thank you.
I
Thank you for
appreciate
that
it.
answer. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Rep. Magosha. Any other member? Recognize Rep. Lizama.
Thank you, Chairman. And welcome, Mr. Castro. I have a few questions, and probably some of this question may,
Rep. Lizama, if you can just put it closer to your mouth. Thank you.
some of this question may have been answered already, but I still want to ask you this question.
Yes, sir.
How were the members of the review panel selected?
That's a great question. So I know that in my instance, the governor had asked me if I would be willing. In terms of Mr. Atalik and Mr. De Leon Guerrero, I would assume that it's an assumption that the governor may have also considered them on equal footing to serve, and from those respective agencies. Um, that's my, to the best of my knowledge and recollection, that's how I believe that all kind of came to be.
Okay, thank you. Who selected the members of the review panel?
The governor is the ultimate appointing authority.
Is there anything in writing that documents their appointment to the review panels?
That's a great question. To the best of my knowledge, I can't recall, but I wouldn't put it past the administrator, being the administrator, having some of that foundational information early, somewhere in here, but I can't, to the best of my knowledge and ability, as a member of the panel, recall.
What criteria did the members of the panel use in reviewing applications?
That's a great question. I thank you. I think it's a good one. I think it's a good question because there are there are several provisions of several guidelines in probably two different documents that have been put forward, right? And forgive me if I don't have it, but some of you may recall there's a rubric that was developed early on in the early stages of Boost that had some considerations like relative to employee retainment, new jobs, how much capitalization was needed for fixed assets, things like that. But then there was also discussion that may be inherent in the communication provided by the administrator that talks about considerations of, is this a new business? Is it an existing business? Is it a nonprofit? And then there are other discussions. I think it's even outlined in one or more documents here too. That is it a new and innovative business, right? And then if you refer to the September and December documents provided by the Secretary of Finance, those are recurring themes in these discussions. Is it central to the spend plan as evidenced here, and would directly assist small businesses and provide aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, hospitality. Those are all considerations that are thrown in the mix, if you will, Congressman. And those are things that come to the top of my mind when I participate as a member of the panel. You know, what impact would this have upon that business, and in turn, that business have upon the community? In more ways than one, even outside of tourism. So there are many considerations, and some of them are memorialized to wit here. Forgive me, I don't have it's not annotated here, but the document is entitled Boost Program, says version 8.13.02022, and this is found in the submission by the Secretary of Finance. And this is a great tool to refer to. At least I know I've referred to this many times in my mind and in practice on looking at this. Are these nonprofits, serving a particular purpose? Is it a non-annual grant? Is this a company that has been in existence that we want to strengthen, that has a proven working model or a solid management team? These are the kind of considerations I go through. I can't speak for the rest of the panel. Is it a new business? And unfortunately I can't give you like the names, but there's an example of a business, if I may. And I don't know how much time I have, but I just want to give you this one example of a group of young men. I assume they're under the age of 23. They don't look more than 23. And they engage in traditional fishing practices. As a matter of fact, they're almost, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but they're masters of free diving and spearfishing, legal spearfishing. And then they purvey their arts in a very creative way. I took particular interest in that because they are in a unique position to serve as influencers for other fishers in the community. That's inspiring to me. It may not have met all the criteria and other guidelines, but that's a factor, perhaps subjective as it may be, that I took into mind when evaluating their submission that ultimately qualified as being complete and for full consideration for award.
So that means that those criteria were developed before.
Yes, sir. There's some documents on file that help guide the discussions, and these are the things I use. And I'm sure when the other members of the panel come up and the administrator, you'll be able to ask the same questions, and you may get different answers, but that's from my perspective.
Thank you. Are those criteria published anywhere? If not, why not?
Well, thank you for the question. It's consistent with another member here earlier. Forgive me, this is not meant to be any form of sarcasm. I don't know if they're published widely. I do know that I have a copy and I've consistently referred to this. I know it's in our emails. As to why it may have not been published, I think that's a appropriate question for the administrator. But actually, since we're having a nice discussion here, actually, I think it might have been published in one or more ads. Now, I can't say that definitively, but I believe early on that it was covered in radio ads and or print ads. and I hope I'm not wrong, but that's what I believe to be true and correct.
Thank you. How did the members of the panel decides which application to review first, if you have those?
Which applications to review first?
Yes.
I couldn't answer for my colleagues, but I know I exercise every diligent effort not just to stick with the chronological order or receipt. I do refer to the list a lot of times. So the lists that are prepared, they have a listing of who's complete. What I try to do, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. What I do is avoid the incomplete ones because you can see it's a clear check or not check. And then sometimes, Congressman, I would come in and look at the stacks and go through and look at different piles and see, and sometimes I'll stumble across an application. And I'll state for the record, I don't know 99% of these entities. I really don't. I haven't resided here for more than 18 months. The last time I lived here was 15 years ago, I think. And I saw, gosh, I want to use great examples, but I just can't without being specific. An example of an entity that's been around that I think if they got an infusion of capital could scale up. So how others do it, I don't know, but that's kind of my mixed bag approach to kind of shaking it up, go chronological, but also jump into the different piles and look at the list. So I have three ways of identifying which applications I want to review and then put on the table to discuss with my colleagues.
Thank you. One more question. Did the members of the panel decide how much money to award to applicants? If so, how did they make those decisions?
Sure, it's a really good question. And again, I don't mean to sound coy or evasive, but the panel's role is restricted to at being advisory. Now, whether that's de facto decision making or not, it can be debated one way or the other. But I know that we discuss the requested amount of the amount requested by a particular entity. Early in the Boost program, there was an understanding that we would refrain from awarding any particular applicant 100% of their requests. And the primary reason for that is because we did take into consideration the possibility that someone, let's say, hypothetically, would receive requested for 100,000 and they got 100,000, and then they took off, to the Cayman Islands or I don't know where you would go, and that's that. And and to the good Senator-elect's question, how do you recover that? I wasn't even there yet. I was still on the how do we make sure they're using the money as they stipulated or stated in their business plan or the letter of intent. Well, one of the stopgap mechanisms that I thought was neat, that's useful, was that you provide a partial award so that you can come back if the opportunity presented itself, and the record will reflect these are active discussions right now, that there would be an opportunity to go back and use a framework much like we do in college with a program review where you would you go in and get internal input and external input and constructively analyze if the monies are being invested properly, and if not, how would you help guide them? So that's a fluid discussion among the panelists, Congressman. Yes, the panel does convene. The panel does discuss what would be an award suitable. Like, of course, it's subjective. Sometimes we butt heads and sometimes we don't, of how much to award. And there is no fixed percentage that I am aware of. But that's the activity that I engage in, that I know I actively engage in. I'll give you, if I could, I can give you an example without naming a business. So one applicant in one instance would say, have a request for like 150,000. Um, Again, that's not an accurate number, but let's just assume it's 100,000. And we saw that one of the main capital investments would be for a commercial, like meat cutting machine of like such a size. And this is like a real discussion. Like, do you know that that company needs this thing to cut this size leg of a cow in Tinian, as an example? And I'm thinking, wow, man, I didn't even think of that. Like, that's a reality in Tinian. And so the capital outlay for that piece of equipment could be 15 to 25,000 off the bat. That is a significant motivational force for me to say, let's provide the 20,000 for that at the least. And then if they invested it properly and we see that it's benefiting their business, then perhaps we can recommend or come back to the table if the time permitted and there's resources to allow them to extend their their business, like in terms of a garage or whatever, extending the building. So those are the kind of fluid discussions that go on at the panel, Congressman.
Thank you. And then Hugh,
Just to further clarify Rep. Lazama's questions, when determining dollar amounts for these awards, how is it that the panel is making a decision not knowing how many more applicants to review and how much funds would be left after giving the first 100 applicants their awards?
That's a good question, sir. I'm not sure I'm in a good position to answer that. So you're asking me, so how do we determine if the panel as a whole, we're going to give this group or this entity 100,000, and then as time goes on, there's less money to award. I don't know that I have a satisfactory answer to that, sir. Um, I know that I give some thought to that downrange, but what's in front of me, whether it was an October submission or an August or a November, that's what I'm dealing with at that moment. I can't speak for the other panelists, and yes, I too am concerned about future appropriate or future awards.
Well, so what would have been the panel's solution to when all the funds have been awarded to the first 25% of total applicants that applied? How would you fund the remaining applicants?
I don't think I have an answer to that question, but it's a good one.
So there wasn't any thought put into how to serve all applicants if so far none has been denied?
I think that discussion had occurred on a number of occasions. Um, to the best of my knowledge, yes. But I do know the discussion was also had that it was a competitive process, that it wasn't one of those programs where you give a stipulated amount across the board to all applicants. Unlike there is a program within Boost that does that. Excuse me. The Fisher Farmer Rancher program, on its face, a subsistence award of up to $500 is kind of built around that kind of a concept where it's universally applied across the board, regardless, provided that you qualify. But in terms of laying it out a roadmap to touch every single applicant, because there's no way to know how many applicants would be submitting. In the beginning, as an example, if I may, Mr. Chairman, in the beginning, as a matter of fact, your Senate district, and congratulations, by the way, your senatorial district of Rhoda, in the beginning, there were 33 submissions. And I would say, uh, within a reasonable margin of error, that less than 10% were fully compliant. And so we took the overt initiative to go down the Rhoda with technical support systems like SBDC, Nadine, Saipan Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Kamatsu, and others, and representatives from finance and commerce to produce the required documentation on site, in addition to Mango, big player in this, big participant, and Emma Perez to provide technical support to help these people put their packages together, to literally sit down and help them. Within weeks, that number went from like 33 to 85 with a 95% compliance rate, meaning they got all the information in because of the technical assistance provided, not by me necessarily, but by a multitude of counselors. And so there was no way to have projected that this is a new program. And so the questions you're asking me are good ones, sir. But they're not necessarily questions that I think I can satisfactorily answer in terms of the broad range strategic planning. But I gave you the facts based on my experiences.
Thank you for that. But so going back to an earlier response to Rep. Lazama's questions, when you apply this rubric to an applicant, there are instances where you go beyond the rubric and look at other aspects coming from how you feel and not necessarily stick directly to these rubrics.
I wouldn't say in my instance, again, I can't speak for Mr. Delangro or Mr. Atalik, but in my instance, the example I gave you as an example of the three young men, I wouldn't say it went off the rubric, but I would classify it under either industry diversification or new and innovative. But it's still kind of tangential to that new and innovative because they were applying a creative expression of their craft. The emphasis for me was on that creative expression of their craft. And so there wasn't a subsection that said creative expression of your craft. But I took it upon me in my subjective nature in reviewing this and discussing it with my colleagues that this was a great manifestation of new and innovative. So that question would also be appropriate for other members of the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Castro. Any other member? Yes. Recognize Rep. Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Castro, do you know who owns Royal Soil?
Yes, sir.
Who owns Royal Soil?
Council. If I could just, is this a follow-up question to our earlier discussion?
No, this is a new question.
No, not the, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're asking your
Well, I understand that Royal Soil may be an applicant, and so I was advised to refrain from speaking on any particular applications. So
They-
in the absence of my counsel, I'm deferring to you in good faith, based on predicated on an earlier discussion that you didn't see any harm. I think this might be an example
But
where,
Mr. Castro, isn't Royal Soil also a subcontractor in any of or has taken part in any of the boost program?
yes,
So can you respond to that then and their role?
I don't know.
is
I,
Royal
honestly, I
Soil?
don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't know if I could.
We're not talking about the person's application right now. We're asking if you know who Royal Soil is because they're listed as a.
I think we just disclosed that they're an applicant, so I don't know.
Okay, so they are in fact an applicant.
I believe they are, sir.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. You just clarified that they are an applicant because um,
I believe they are.
can you please pull up? Sure. The three documents I sent you, the second one. Next one. That one. Mr. Castro, in an exchange with, in communication with the president of Bank of Saipan, Mr. John Arroyo, where is this? Starting from November 17, can we look at that date? Would you like me to read this for the record? Thank you. Yeah. It says, from Will Castro, hi, John. I may need a short hard copy letter from you to Governor. Draft only, please. Message, thank you for contacting me, Governor, to confirm if Mr. Shane Villanueva received a boost award. As of the date of your inquiry, Tuesday, November 15, 2022, there is no written or electronic record of a boost application in full or in part submitted by Mr. Shane Villanueva. Mr. Villanueva has not been awarded a boost grant. Please let me know if you have any further questions or comments in this regard. Thank you. And then John replies, John Arroyo, president of Bank of Saipan, says, stand by. And then Will Castro says, Honorable Ralph Doris, Governor, okay, continues on. And then it says, I won't release the draft. This is from until I get the boss's approval, Will Castro. These guys spewing all kinds of false and misleading information. Okay, go to the next page. And then on 11/17, sorry, the third page. Okay, I'll continue. I understand, says John. And then Will Castro says, yeah, we need to kill that rumor. It's spreading and it's bullshit. Continuing, Will Castro, I don't let things like that get to me, to be TBH. Yes, that stands for to be honest. But this one, I'm going to get in front of it and kill it quickly. And then Will Castro, we will publish a report next week. Perfect. Just emailed it from John. So it's interesting, Mr. Castro, because
I remember that time. That was, I think, during the runoff. Is that correct? Yeah, I think so. Anyway, it was during the runoff. And the interesting thing about this is that John Arroyo, the president of Bank of Saipan, of all the things he could have put out when we were asking for all kinds of documents, Mr. John Arroyo put one thing out to state that Mr. Shane Villanueva did just basically exactly almost verbatim, word for word, what you had asked him to say, he said. And he put it out that we don't have any record of Mr. Shane Villanueva of applying for a grant whatsoever or anything. And then we find out, can you pull out the first one? Pull out that list. Zoom in on Royal Soil. There's three companies that applied for for a grant under Royal Soil. Zoom in just a little bit more. Little bit. Can we? My eyes are not that great. There's Royal Soil Clothing, Royal Soil Marketing, Royal Soil Wholesale. Let's look at the amounts that they applied for. $280,200, $239,200, $184,300. So we were told that basically during the runoff, we were looking like liars. So people questioning our credibility because the Bank of Saipan president had said, we don't know anything about anything from Shane Villanueva. Well, it turns out that, yeah, not Shane Villanueva, but Royal Soil. Who doesn't know that Shane Villanueva is not Royal Soil? Very few people. And you're telling me that the Bank of Saipan president had no idea? Nonetheless, that was put out, and people were questioning our credibility. I guess my question is, why was that memo put out if in fact Royal Soil was an applicant? And why were people questioning that made to look like liars when the fact is he was an applicant? That's my first question.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Chairman, I could stand to be corrected, but I believe that I had validated this information with the president and staff at the bank as of the date of the memo, if you would refer to it. The date of that message was probably the 15th of November, I forget. But if you look at specifically what the president had put out, that as of the date of the inquiry, November 13th, there was no record, written or otherwise, of a Royal Soil clothing, marketing, or wholesale that had been received as a matter of record. So it is true. Well, actually, I stated that to the best of my knowledge, that application is in, and probably this is a good reflection of that. But what you don't see here is the date of receipt of application. And I suspect, although I stand to be corrected, that the record will affirm that as of the date of November 13, none of these companies had applied for a boost award. That is factually true to the best of my knowledge. So again, let me state, as of November 13th and then the subsequent email, the 15th or whatever it was, there was no record of Royal Soil having been received. As a matter of fact, I'd be very curious if we could pull it up, if somebody has that, when they stamped receipt. And I suspect it's not till a week after that. Today is Friday, December 16th. And if what I see in front of me is true and correct, then yes, definitively, Royal Soil in all three iterations, whether they're the same or different companies, are applicants. But to the best of my knowledge, and I would take this up with the administrator, having that being his official position, as of the date of that statement, that was true.
So you remember the dates then?
Well, because I read it, November 13th.
Okay,
yeah.
so that's fantastic because it shows your excellent memory, where we'll be asking about other companies soon. But I just wanted to get to this. So what would help this committee tremendously is if we had these instead of alphabetical order, that we got them in chronological order, meaning what dates were they received and what dates did they apply. And that would have clarified a lot of things. So you're saying it's after the fact. But nonetheless, Royal Soil still did apply. So you killed the rumor, but then they still went ahead and applied anyway. So they are an applicant, in fact. But you're saying that it's not as of the date. So perhaps what we need, this committee needs, is everything in chronological order so that we can look at this and we can judge by the dates that they were received and when they were applied. I think that would help clear up a lot of these questions about that. But they did apply. By the way, did they get approved?
I don't know, sir, at this point in time.
You're a panelist. You don't remember if Royal Soil
I
was
Sir,
ever
I've been,
approved?
that is correct. As of this time, I do not recall if they've been awarded at this point in time.
Is Royal Soil, uh, are they hired to do marketing?
I believe they are, sir, yes.
They are. Are they contracted by the Office of the Governor? Or are they through the Boost campaign under Bank of Saipan? Who is employing them?
The administrator would be the authority on that, but I suspect they have been contracted through the Bank of Saipan.
So they are a contract. They are
That is,
Okay.
I believe
For
that to be true.
marketing. Okay, and then they also applied for the Boost. Okay, all right. So could you let us know the date? I'd be curious to know, and also if they did get approved, and what was the total? Would that be possible for something for this committee to receive?
Yes, sir. I think so that there's no conjecture. The best source would be to make an official request of the Bank of Saipan, the administrator.
So Mr. John Arroyo can give us all this information in chronological order.
He has the
right, from when they
capacities.
were.
Yes,
right.
sir. He has the infrastructure.
Okay.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Thank you. I yield at this point.
Thank you, Rep. Probst. Rep. Saban, did you have your hand up earlier?
Yeah, I
I
did.
recognize.
Just going back to this rubric that you described, Mr. Castro, that is also in the internal guidance, which we asked for and which the Bank of Saipan provided. In addition to the items that you mentioned, whether it's a new business or existing, the number of jobs that would be created and so forth, there was also one of the, I guess, criteria, if you could call it that, was the remaining balance of Boost program funds in relation to the grant amount requested. So how much money was left, right? The remaining balance of the allocation bucket in relation to the grant amount requested. And so very early on in the program, from the very beginning, there was a decision that was made to not wait until all the completed applications were submitted before distributing checks. And I guess I'd like to just ask you to explain, like, what is the rationale for not waiting until all the grant applications were in, so that you would know how much money was available and how much money was being requested, and like what would be the most equitable way to distribute these funds, or and to ensure that they were evenly distributed, right? Like why would the decision be made based on those criteria? How much money was left? It was how much you were going to recommend for funding when you didn't wait for all the completed applications to be submitted.
Could you restate the question?
Why not wait until all the completed applications were submitted?
Thank you for the question. I can't speak for the panel, but I can speak in hindsight. If the collective decision was made to wait until December 18th before any awards would be made, then we may have missed out on over 90 to 120 days of circulating cash into the economy that may, at least I would think, serve a useful role in revitalizing the economy. I didn't make a decision to hold back any money or to wait till all the completions. Um, I think that's a good question for the panel and maybe more so the administrator or Secretary of Finance. I don't have an answer, ma'am. All I know is I didn't decide one way or the other whether we'll wait till December 18th, which is the definitive deadline.
The deadline changed 3 times, as you noted,
I
right?
think twice, but yes, 2 or 3 times, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. So who was making that decision then?
Ultimately, the governor makes the decision, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. And then I guess my next question is, you mentioned having the rubric with you when you were reviewing applications, right?
On more than one occasion, yes.
So it wasn't on all occasions that all the members of the review panel had the rubric in front of them as they were reviewing
I
applications?
can't speak for them, but I do know, as a matter, I do know that I probably have it in my brief now, and I do know I'm very familiar with the rubric. So if I have it on hand, I would refer to it once in a while, but I pretty much got most of it down. I recited most of the categories without referring to the document.
Right, right. And I guess what I'm getting at is, did the review panel keep a record for how they evaluated each of the applications based on that rubric?
I would ask each individual member, but I do not keep written records of if there's a numerical expression assigned per application note, like you would evaluate.
Mhm.
I don't keep any written record of that, ma'am.
So there's no record of that as far as you know?
There's no written record of that as far as I know, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
It's possible, it's very possible that these panel members independently also review these packets like I do. I think from time to time, I could provide for the record that I come in to review the applications on occasion so that I've done my due diligence.
Wait, so you weren't reviewing altogether
We would
these
discuss
applications?
that's correct. We would come together. We would always seek consensus. Decisions to advance a list would always be made by consensus. But review, as it's probably stipulated here somewhere, that the members of the panel may elect from time to time to come into the Bank of Saipan in a secured area and review the respective applications.
Hmm. So the guidance here that was submitted, and it and there are references to a loan. I assume that's an error. But in reviewing, so I'm just going to read. In reviewing submitted loans, the GRP panel, that's what's GRP?
Grant review panel, ma'am.
The grant review panel will consider the following in arriving at a funding recommendation. And it goes through all of the different items, how much money's left, if the grant applicant can avail of other sources, and then there's points assigned, right? I mean, you know this rubric. Why, if this was part of your process, the review panel will have this rubric and make decisions based on that, and there are points for each of these items. Why would there not be a record of how points were calculated for each of these applications to justify your funding recommendations?
Thank you for the question. The administrator would be the ultimate authority to explain that further, but I
But you're
can't.
the review panel,
I
right?
am, but
One of 3 members.
sure. So my role is to review and make my recommendations as to what the administrative requirements are for being the keeper of the record and maintaining maybe a scorecard of some sort. I would direct that to the administrator if he elected to put that before the review panel. I would just get his opinion on it. But what I can say is that this rubric was used, and it's probably in Mr. Arroyo's submission as well, would be used as a guide. If you refer to the same rubric at the top, I believe that it very clearly states that it was designed for a low to no interest bearing loan situation. I think there was probably a reference
Which
to
you said changed, right? It changed from a loan to a grant.
right. And so in that case, and I could be wrong, there's some questions relative to income to debt ratio. There may be. I don't have it right. I don't even know what page it on is on. And there's reference to other sources of funding.
Other sources of
And
funding,
that's a
yes, not
reality.
income to debt.
Right. So there's going to be other sources of funding come January 2023, SSBCI program and others. Um, in discussions among ourselves, I can share with you without being specific that there are applications that request for serious investments in construction or capital outlay of a building. Um, in the spirit of the program, it wasn't designed to provide $500,000 so you can build a second story. It was designed to boost your existing or new business to getting off the ground or shoring up your existing operation. Because if we funded everyone with a capital outlay requirement for a building or as a building, then in that case there would be a very finite amount of awards because most capital outlays are over about 150,000 based on
Mr.
experience.
Castro, it is a standard process for anybody that's ever done any sort of grant application review in the government to have this record of evaluation, right? And like there's like nothing that I'm saying is rocket science. And even in your own guidance, which the administrator provided and which you referred to and clearly are very familiar with, it says you will rate each application and recommendations would be based on the ratings. But there is no record of any ratings for any applicant? Like you never wrote down how you rated
So as I
an
stated,
applicant?
so as I stated, that rubric is not an official adopted tool as part of the process. But I would defer to the administrator of the program to provide any definitive statements in that regard.
Well, let me ask you as a review panelist.
Yes,
If you
ma'am.
have no written record of evaluation for each of these applications, how would you deal with future cases in which applicants would contest the process, challenge the process? They want to know why they didn't get their boost grant, why they didn't get how much, whatever it was that they asked for. How would you respond to those?
First of all, I wouldn't individually respond. I defer to the administrator.
How would, h- but you would not be able to show, the administrator then would not be able to justify these funding recommendations because none of the review panelists provided a record of evaluation. Would you agree with that?
No, not necessarily. As I stated, each individual member may have elected to take notes of the review. I opted not to record the name or any numerical expression of the value of one or more parts of the criteria by which I made an evaluation.
But you as a review panel submitted your recommendations to the governor. You didn't submit that list. It didn't come with any ratings for each of the applications.
That is correct.
Wow. I yield at this time, Mr. Chairman.
May I? Mr. Castro, you talk about this rubric, were you or any member of the panel free to ignore this rubric and just add and subtract at any point in your review? Just because it felt good, or?
I couldn't speak to what makes the other members feel good, ma'am, but I could tell you that I never deliberately chose to set aside any rubric, whether it was the one that the good representative was referring to or this additional document that I was referring to. I normally make references to both when weighing the merit of an application.
You're talking about a document, or do we have that document?
Yes, ma'am. This was the one that was submitted to the CNMI legislature from the administrator of the Boost program, Mr. Arroyo.
And what is that?
It's
I can't
titled,
see from here,
it's
sorry.
okay. I can read the title and it's in your, I would assume it's in your packet because I got the same packet you did. It's titled Boost Program, Building Optimism, Opportunities, and Stability Together. And it has an annotation on the bottom. I'd be happy to surrender this for you to make a closer reference. And there's an annotation on the bottom.
We have
right.
it, according to the chairman.
Okay, okay. So that's what I'm referring to.
I have one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Knowing that there was a finite amount of boost award money, first 11 million, then the second award to Bank of Saipan was 6 million. Knowing there was a finite amount, what protections were in place that one individual who owned multiple companies did not receive multiple awards? Records reflect that one company, one individual with multiple companies, at least 6 that we know of, received all 6 awards for a grand total of over $600,000. What protections were in place? There was a finite amount of money. Applications kept coming in. Deadlines kept getting extended. Meanwhile, other applications who submitted either prior to or immediately after this one person who had 6 companies that we know of and were not being considered because there was no regulation as to priority of business, as to priority of date of application. What protections did you have in place to safeguard this finite amount so that possibly more applicants, instead of just the 241, could possibly receive anything? As far as we can tell, 241 applicants were awarded over $10 million. So please answer the question, what protections were in place?
So there was a reference to a singular owner of 6 companies. I'm not privy to the owner or all 6.
We
I,
have the incorporation documents. We
Yes,
can
ma'am.
put it up if you want,
you don't have to,
but
but
okay,
my
thank you.
my
We
point
will
would
at a
be
later date.
that's fine. That's fine with me. The panel at no point in time is privy to articles of incorporation. Based on my experience, it's not a required submission. Based on
And
my
why is that? Initially, there was in the documents that we received that this program was supposed to give companies who were established prior to October 1st, 2019. And then we've had a flurry of new businesses that were created immediately prior to the November 18th deadline. What changed? Why was that regulation not in place at the time you executed this program?
by you mean the boost pro.
The people involved, I'm sorry.
Okay,
It's
it's
not meant for
okay.
you personally.
No, I
The people
understand. I
involved.
just want to make sure the listening audience knows that I didn't make these decisions. So a prevailing, uh, a priority of the administration has been to diversify the economy, and everyone at the table took that into consideration to allow new operations to take foothold in the community that may help flush that out, if you will. And I've seen a few of those in my experience on the panel as one reviewer. But taken as a whole and collectively, I, I mean, prior to October 1, 2019, I I I can't say that there was any one person weighed in and say we're gonna not honor that. I think businesses that were impacted by COVID-19. As a matter of fact, I could submit, based on my recollection, that there is a disproportionate amount of existing businesses to new businesses that have received awards. So there are more existing businesses. And then I want to do my homework. Thank you for enlightening me. What is the average length of time that these businesses have been around? Because as far as I know, they're listed on the ledger under not animo, as opposed to an incubator business, which would be a new business. So I'm sure it's listed here what a not animo is. I don't know, it's 6 months or more. But the purpose of that would be to identify those that have been around and are recovering versus those that may have just started up in 2 weeks to 6 weeks. That's my understanding of it. So there's 4 categories, but relevant germane to this discussion would be the incubator and not animo program. So your points are well noted, and I don't have the answer for the collective why we and not me moved in that direction.
Okay, but can you please answer the question, what protections were in place to prevent one owner who applied under multiple business names, different business plans? What protections were in place to prevent awarding that one person over $600,000?
Sure.
And of course, you wouldn't know because, as you mentioned, it wasn't a requirement to
Yes,
know
ma'am.
who these businesses are.
Yes, ma'am. And as the congressman noted earlier, members of this body asked a question, so I won't ask a follow-up question. Instead, I'll phrase it this way: I don't necessarily believe that owning more than one business and having more than one enterprise is a detriment to, or should be a factor in consideration or in discriminating against your further qualifying for one or more awards. I'm not defending the proprietor of 6 businesses. I'm saying it is possible that one individual who was successful in this venture has a new venture and could also duplicate the same type of success to diversify the economy. I know from my vantage point, I would not hold that against the applicant simply because they own more than one business. It could be a hot dog stand and a rent a car, or it could be a hotelier and a new apparel shop. In the instance that you referenced twice, and again, forgive me, I'm not defending the individual or the corporation. I'm just not fully aware, but I don't see that necessarily as a detriment. Now, six, if I'm sure that may raise some concerns, and it obviously has with this body.
That would not be a concern for the review panel?
I can't speak for the panel, but it would be an eyebrow lifter
That would
for
not be
me.
a concern for you as a member?
I think I would have to look at it extra carefully, but because the process as it is blind to who the incorporators are, I can only speak hypothetically about that situation.
I yield,
Can I take a,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, can I take a 1 minute recess
Sure.
to?
Uh,
It's gonna-
We'll be back at 3:20. Short recess. this. But before we move forward, I'd like to note that the exhibits earlier that Rep. Probst brought up, the exhibit on the WhatsApp message in regards to Mr. Shane Villanueva will be marked as Exhibit 3, and the exhibit on the Royal Soil, the three companies under the Royal Soil will be marked as Exhibit 4. In the interest of time, members, if you have any follow-up questions, please make note of them. We'll afford each member the opportunity to ask questions they're concerned about, and then if we have time at the end, we'll entertain any follow-up questions. At this time, I believe Rep. Karina Magosnia would like to ask her questions, and so I recognize Vice
Thank
Chair.
you, Chair. And as mentioned, due to time constraints, I will reserve my follow-up questions for towards the end if there is ample time. Mr. Castro, who is Karen Callan and what is her role in the Boost program?
I hope I get this right, but I believe Karen Callan is the lady who works, the gentle lady who works at the Bank of Saipan as a manager. And the second question was, what is her role? She's a member of the Bank of Saipan staff. She has no formal role with the Boost program, to the best of my knowledge. Like, she's not a panelist, ma'am. I think she serves subordinate to Mr. Arroyo and as perhaps a lead staffer to help facilitate the administrator's work on behalf of the Boost program.
So it is your testimony that in no way Karen has no role in the administration of Boost.
That's actually a more poignant question. I don't know definitively, Senator-elect. What I do know is that she's an employee of the bank, and if Mr. Arroyo has delegated some of those tasks as the administrator to her, he would be the best person to ask. But as far as I know, no member of the Bank of Saipan sits in panel discussions or has a role at that level, if you will.
Okay, okay. Thank you for that answer. Who is Shane Villanueva and what is his role in the Boost program?
Shane Villanueva is, to the best of my knowledge, the proprietor of the marketing firm that is responsible for one or more programs within the Boost umbrella. That's his role.
Great, thank you for that answer. Who is Selena Sapp and what is her role in the Boost program?
Thank you. Ms. Selena Sapp, similar to Mr. Shane Villanueva's role, is, I don't understand. I don't know what her exact role in her corporation is, but she is the representative of a marketing firm that is also partially responsible for one or more programs within the Boost umbrella. I do want to say for the record that neither of them, I know it was asked of me, but it's worth stating for the record, neither of them are on the review panel.
And you don't recall which marketing firm that is? She works
I
for?
believe she's with a company called Nonstop Corporation.
Is that a company incorporated here in the CNMI or elsewhere?
You got me. I don't know, ma'am.
Okay,
I'm not, if it's not in best of my recollection, I just do not know.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that answer. Did Mr. Villanueva or Ms. Sapp serve as members of the review panel at any time during the Boost?
No, ma'am. Not to the best of my knowledge. Whenever I sat in deliberations with my colleagues on the panel, they were not present. They're not members. Neither of the two individuals you had mentioned work for either the Departments of Commerce, Finance, or the Office of the Governor. And based on my testimony, those are the three members who constitute the panel.
Great, thank you for that answer. Cam, would you please pull up the exhibit? If you don't mind. Mr. Castro, if I may direct your attention to the screen, this is a text message correspondence between yourself and I believe Ms. Sapp. So on November 23rd, 2022, at approximately 11:57 a.m., Mr. Castro, I'm asking Shane or Selena, if he can, to do steps 1, 2, and 3 of the review. I believe the boost. Would you care to clarify?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's a very legitimate question. So what you are referring to is text messages, I'm assuming, between myself and Mr. Arroyo. If you look at the line that says 11:23:22, 11:57 Will Castro with the asterisk FFR application review. FFR stands for Fisher Farmer Rancher Program. The FFR program in this respect is the $500 subsistence program. It's pretty straightforward. Mike, there were, again, if I could just, I'm going to share a bunch of stuff, like give you a bunch of facts that I know to be true and correct. When we had kicked off the program, my goodness, there were hundreds of people lined up outside the Bank of Saipan. Even given the existing infrastructure of personnel at the bank, they couldn't handle it. Not that they're incompetent, they just, the infrastructure, human infrastructure wasn't there. People were wrapping around the building. I believe that either Mr. Arroyo, he would have to authorize this, had allowed them to serve in an extended administrative capacity to conduct the due diligence to simply, could you blow that back up? I know I'm wearing glasses, but in this case, it's not helping. So if you look at step 1, verify submission of proof, these are all clearly articulated in the ads, and I believe also when you fill out the application. There is, unlike the Boost small business and nonprofit, there is I believe there's a clear checklist for this one, like you have to attach the proof. Verify submission of proof. Okay, number 1, verify completeness. That means you have to have filled in all the blanks. Submission of proof, which is a picture that validates that you are in fact a Fisher Farmer Rancher. And if both are validated, then place on the screened pile. That's the extent, and I interpret that, I mean, based on strictly what I read, as an administrative function. There is no decision making here. As a matter of fact, to my point, if you look at number 4, the panel, myself and 2 others, will again review and recommend to the governor for approval. So in this instance, I suspect they were providing supplemental administrative services outside that of marketing to complete steps 1, 2, and 3. Does that satisfy your question, ma'am?
Not quite.
Okay,
Well,
I want to try again.
okay, so first of all, she's not even an employee per se uh, with Bank of Saipan. So is it a normal business practice to have someone else outside who's not an employee be part of an administrative function?
Um, well, that's a great question. Marketing is, in my opinion, an administrative function that has been outsourced. In this case, again, these questions are really good and they're really more appropriate for the administrator. But I want to attempt to answer to the best of my ability in good faith, in the spirit of cooperation. Similar to marketing, as a supplement to the bank's existing services that they are able to provide as an administrator, in this instance, they were also possibly contracted to provide supplemental administrative services for and on behalf of the bank. There is no decision making. They're simply literally taking a document and then like talking to the person, say, okay, did you fill it? Don't forget your date of birth. And then do you have a picture of your fishing tools or whatever? And then that's really it. Administrative function. They stack it and they leave it for those charged with reviewing it, at least in this process, and preparing the list and sending that to the governor. So is it within normal business practice? I can't speak in generally, but I would think this is acceptable in this instance. This is my subjective evaluation of that. I'm not a decision maker, but I think it's justifiable.
Okay. I just find it unusual that Bank of Saipan, being the administrator of this program, would ask a non-employee. I mean, I know that she's subcontracted to do marketing work, but you know, to be asked to do administrative work for the bank itself during the review process. So,
So thank you for that. And if I can I add to that,
Sure.
I could be wrong, but I believe they had also outsourced another private entity, not necessarily Mr. Villanueva's or Ms. Sapp's, to provide, those to provide the calls to the applicants because they were so far behind. Like literally, if I could share openly, and again, I apologize to the listening audience and to you, colleagues, I mean, members of the body, that it was so overwhelming that it was hard to keep up with the due diligence to call each applicant on the status of their submission. So they had to bring in additional help. They did that in that regard, and I believe they did. I believe they did that in that regard. Get external help, and then also in this case.
so let me ask you, since the request was coming from you, like out of all the people that you could request for assistance, why her and why Shane?
They were already built into the existing services within under the auspice of the bank. And I could be wrong, but I believe I had asked Mr. Arroyo or his representative if that would be acceptable. And you're right. I appreciate you couching it correctly that I had requested. I had not directed or ordered it. It would be beyond the scope of my authority as a member of the panel. But in many instances, as all 80 pages may indicate, I would provide recommendations and strong guidance based on my experience with logistical needs and things like this. I see it with my eyes. I go through this. We've been down this road before in different capacities. When you're overwhelmed, you get help. There was a fire. We needed a few fire persons to come and help extinguish it. And this is not the first time, but it was a good kind of internal crisis.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Is Mr. Villanueva an employee of the Bank of Saipan? Is Ms. Sapp an employee of Bank of Saipan? Clearly it is.
To the best of my knowledge, I don't think so. I I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I don't think so.
Would you know why didn't Bank of Saipan as the administrator screen these applications for farmer, fisher, and the rancher grants?
Oh, I don't think. Again, you're asking me questions based on what I believe to be true, and I'm happy to cooperate. First, I don't think that they didn't. I think that they were doing it, and they just couldn't keep up with the existing infrastructure of personnel. Remember, they're first bankers and tellers. And if you had walked in to the Bank of Saipan in along Beach Road, my gosh, there were people lining up for days, and they would be directed at the tellers. Those are people who would receive and facilitate discussions. That was over and above those that were collected. It takes about anywhere between 30 seconds and at the longest a minute and a half to receive a document. And we were receiving hundreds. I think there were 2,000 to be frank, but they needed the help and quickly. Otherwise, they would have wrapped around the bank for a few hours. Thankfully, it was going down in minute. They were able to process more people, faster processing time, less wait. I think that was the concern, for, protecting them from the elements as well. I'm talking about the applicants.
Thank you for that answer. I was just curious, at what point when did this idea or concept come out for the fishers and farmers, and like when did that come out? Because it looks like it was an afterthought.
I uh, it does certainly look like that. Um, I want to venture out and say that the Fisher Farmer Rancher program has been with the governor before I came on board, to be frank. He's verbally stated on numerous occasions before my onboarding as chief of staff that he would earmark a certain amount of dollars for fishers on Saipan, farmers on Luta, and ranchers on Tinian. I believe, and I could stand to be corrected, that he also acted on that. So, consistent with the executive will, this program adopted that priority as well and also identified a mechanism through which those persons who fit those categories at a different level could receive aid uh, to the tune of subsistence award of $500 each.
So why was that not considered in the initial concept when you guys were developing this program?
Great question. Because it's not a perfect process, and the initial thought was to help small businesses, and then in conversation with great people like Emma Perez from Mango, why aren't you considering nonprofits? The record will reflect that nonprofits had been receiving ARPA funds directly from the governor before Boost was born. The idea then became to put it into a comprehensive system where there was a rhyme and a rhythm that may, with an infrastructure and a support mechanism to help this process through, right? There's like multiple layers. So, yes, there was the small business. Even that was a debate in and of itself. Then the nonprofit and the workforce development should have come out sooner, but it was a much more difficult program to roll out. There's so many things to have to address legally as well, because you're talking employment of certain types of people. And then the fisher farmer rancher, and then I mentioned for the record the fifth one. I might get it wrong, but which number it is, but it's the last, not the last one, but it's the one I really hope manifests as well. The Boost Small Business Center, and I hope it comes to fruition.
Okay,
It's not an afterthought. It may come to life after the fact, after January 9th, but it was never an afterthought. It was always an inception and since the beginning.
so is it fair to say that the boost was created to assist small businesses?
I'm sorry, one more time, ma'am.
Is it fair, is it a fair statement to say that the boost program was created to assist small businesses?
Absolutely.
Just small businesses?
No.
Okay. And so we're talking about small businesses, but can you define what
Sure.
you guys would consider a small business?
Sure,
What are the
I-
criteria to be considered a
Yeah,
small
absolutely.
business?
Thank you. So I'm going off of memory here. SBDC was a great source. I think the legal definition of a small business as defined by the Small Business Association is an entity that grosses $20 million or less and has 500 or less employees. So I think 499 and grossing 19.99 million, something like that. The panel, being fully cognizant of that fact, said 20 million. I mean, I'm summarizing, okay, so please, this is not Mr. Guerrero's comments or Mr. Taisagui or Athlete. But in paraphrasing, the discussion was 20 million. My gosh, like everybody, like all the conglomerates qualify, like they just made that. The intent, the spirit of the intent of the program was always to help the smaller businesses. So we dropped it, and that was with the input, I think, of the Saipan Chamber. Somebody mentioned earlier the Governor's Council and Economic Advisors, they were consulted, and CETA was consulted. And so we dropped the 20 million threshold to 10 and the 500 to 250. That's how we arrived at our own state level, if you will, definition of a small business. And I think that's articulated and clearly advertised on more than one occasion. I just don't have the artifact to support that, but I believe that to be true and correct.
Okay, so in all these discussions taking place to determine what would be considered a small business, all of these are documented somewhere, and and that was the criteria that you guys used.
Yes, ma'am. That is what I believe to be true and correct. And again, I'm so sorry. I wish I had it. Maybe I'll bring it Monday. I think there's a flyer or something that was published that says if you meet these two, you know, criteria, you're good. And then there's other stuff that we use to help discern meritable
And I'm
applications.
asking these questions because there are a lot of applicants who have applied but have yet to receive any type of response from Bank of Saipan or from Commerce or whoever they were contacting, right? And one of the concerns is how do the review panel determine, how much to give them? Like if somebody came in and requested for 150,000, like what criterias were you guys looking at to say, okay, yes, sure, this I know that you guys were requiring a business plan. I mean, is that a requirement for every single applicant that submitted that application, or were there some exceptions that you guys made? you know
Sure. So there are about 3 points there, and I hope I do justice to your questions or your points of inquiry. The first one was people are dissatisfied, or there are constituents out there who have not received a call. Again, I'm sorry. I know the Bank of Saipan is trying its best. I know because they got more people to call. The second point was how does the panel could derive at a decision of an amount? I think the good Congressman, Mr. Lazama, after Representative Sablan and others were really drilling in and down on that, and I can only give my perspective. I can't speak for the rest of the panels, but it was sort of a balancing act between the rubrics and what your value system was. I mean, of course, this is a subjective process, but I shared a little bit of that example. And then the third one was, what was the last one, ma'am? Sorry, there's one more. The last point you made, which is 100. I forgot the last one. There's like, we didn't get callbacks. We're disappointed. How do you decide? And anybody remember?
Were there any exceptions where, I mean, were you guys,
Oh, yeah,
was it
that's
required of every applicant to submit a business plan? And were there any exceptions?
okay. That was a
It
two-part
is.
question. Thank you. Yes, it's a requirement. A business plan is a requirement for the small business and nonprofit component. Yes. Not required of the Fisher Farmer Rancher program, so subsistence Fisher Farmer Rancher. Were there exceptions? I've never made an overt exception to exempt an applicant from having to submit that. Not a business plan. Maybe they call it something different, but the elements of a business plan are so essential, in my opinion, to making a determination. In other instances, from time to time, you will find that the stated use of funds or the corporate profile, that is, both are required, may be found in the letter of intent. It might be a two-page letter of intent, but within that is a one paragraph that meets the spirit of the request of a corporate profile. Who are you? What are you about? How long you been around? What are your expertise? Or that is typically found in an abbreviated business plan that Mango and SBDC help put together. But no, I'm not. I don't believe, to the best of my knowledge, that I've ever advocated for an exception. Excuse me, for an exception, to that rule.
Were the business plans just for the new businesses that are open or every single applicant?
All applicants for the small business and nonprofit boost awards are required to submit a business plan, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that answer. Moving along. Mm. On October, no, sorry, Cam, can you pull up the next exhibit? Okay, so if I may direct your attention, please, to the screen. Again, this is another text message between yourself and um, Karen, probably Kay Kent, right? Yes. So can you highlight that? Yes. So on October 28, 2022, at approximately 4:21 p.m., um, Kay Kent says, "Hi, Will. For the Boost Fisher Farmers Ranchers program, aside from photos, etc., will we still require business license and etc.?" And you replied back with more on that this weekend, awaiting approvals for our criteria. Who were you waiting? Who's the approval from?
Awaiting, I would have to assume from a consensus of the panel and or the governor himself. Usually, when I'm uncertain about certain things, I would confer with my colleagues on the panel, and then once there's a consensus, I advance it to the governor to say, "Are you okay with this?" Um, but just to be clear, for the Fisher Farmer Ranches program, uh, because it's a subsistence program, we don't require business license. It is possible to apply for a commercial boost award or a boost award under the commercial small business side as a Fisher Farmer Rancher. But to qualify for the $500 subsistence award, you simply had to provide proof of, I believe, residency, not US citizenship, but residency, and some type of artifact or evidence, any other type, whether it's video, portrait, or something else. I mean, not like an actual fish or something, but that would validate, verify that you in fact were farming to feed your family. That was the intent. To get seedlings, to get tools that would help you to continue to provide for your family, and in a non-commercial way.
Okay, thank you for that. So did you get the approval you were waiting for?
I think if you scroll down, I don't recall, but I'm curious to see what happened after
Oh.
4:22 p.m. Given the date, I don't think I was in Tinian. Looks like they were in Tinian.
Okay.
Yeah, so no, but I can tell you what the final result was. I don't remember the steps. There is no business plan required or business license required. It was considered at one point that these Fisher Farmer ranchers be registered with some type of cooperative, but I couldn't, the deliberations we couldn't resolve in time. Is this a requirement of the state? Because we don't want to create yet another hurdle that even the state hasn't done for its own constituency. Does that make sense? I know certain types of classes of fishers, farmers, and ranchers are required. I think fishers are, but what about ranchers and farmers? And so that the conversation happened. Like if you had it for fishers, but you're not going to do it for farmers and ranchers, and it's a whole can of worms. And I will admit, I would submit to you that this is an imperfect process, and there's constant iteration to improve it, to include the new concerns brought out today.
Thank you for that answer. Sorry, something just caught my attention real quick. So if you just scroll up just a little bit, Cam, if you don't mind. Right there. So on October 28 at approximately 2:18 p.m., message
Oh, yeah.
from you, highlight important, hold Rowena Ogo check.
Yes.
Would you care to elaborate on
Yeah,
that?
thank you. I think that's an important point of clarification because although it's may not concern the body here, it was very concerning for me at that time. I want the record to reflect that the stated reason to hold that check back was because of concerns that the application itself was incomplete. But I also want to state for the record, if you scroll down, there should be additional evidence just minutes thereafter by a completely different party, the administrator himself, that also states that there are few others that are incomplete.
So just to clarify, so a check was already issued when the an application was incomplete?
So, yeah, so it is possible from time to time that due to human error, it's either mislisted or not listed. Okay, so that wasn't the only one, and it's possible that we worked off an older list that may have included names at advance. Maybe that might explain some double payments. Also, that's human error, but and I really would like to find that because I have it in mind, and I followed up subsequently via email that there were three others, and to the point where I asked the panel if we can convene and personally sit down and review the application with our own eyes and not rely on banking staff to validate or invalidate the claim that it was or is not incomplete. Prior to pulling the physical record, I had asked a senior member of the bank to act on or to opine for and on behalf of the administrator if a particular ledger that I had presented to her in the presence of my colleagues evidence that there were two items missing. The individual validated that. Then I think the day after, I memorialized this in my email, which will be included and sent to the senator elect and the coach vice chair. In a subsequent email, I asked the panel to please reconvene again and let's pull the packet and look. The packet should evidence, as I'm about to state for the record, that there were handwritten notes that follow-up calls were made. Upon review of the packet, it was determined that the packet was complete. I subsequently actually we discussed it, and then I memorialized it in email that having concluded that the packet is now complete, to advance it if it had been previously awarded and for a certain amount, as it went through the process, and to notify the recipient as soon as practical. Um, that's what happened.
So typically when the administrator receives the application, they go through that whole process of reviewing the application, right? They have a checklist of whether or not all the documents have been submitted and
Yes.
attached to the application. And
Yes.
normally, by the time it gets to you guys, all of that process would have been completed. And then when you guys receive it, you were reviewing for what?
Ideally, yes, ma'am. So I can speak for myself. In almost every instance, um, we would review. I would review. Let me not speak for my colleagues. I would review only packets that have been deemed complete, and then that's how you deliberate. Otherwise, you would have spent X amount of limited time on a packet that you couldn't otherwise act upon. So um, the short answer is yes. We should be reviewing only completed
Right,
applications.
and then at that point, after you review, you would submit your recommendation to the
Yes,
governor and he
yes.
would approve it, and then a check is subsequently
Yes,
dispersed. So at this,
yes.
in this instance, the check was already issued.
No, the check was probably cut. If it was issued, it
I
to
mean,
issue.
sorry, cut.
Yes,
Well, issued and cut, right? Not, okay, so
they
the
processed
check
the check. They
was,
didn't call
yes.
her and give it to her, but
Right,
she
but
wasn't the
how,
only one. Just for the
but
record, there's
why
four.
was the check cut, printed if it was incomplete?
That that's a great question, and I would have to suspect that it just completely was overlooked because sometimes when we're discussing these matters, I mean, depending on who on the panel is recommending what, we go through it and then we say this is great, and it may have been deemed complete, but somehow somebody along the way vetted it further, and that's great if they did. The bank brought it to one of our members' attention that in addition to a few others in that list, it's possible we worked off a wrong list. I don't know. What I do know is we address it as soon as practical, and then through corrective actions made it right.
I guess I'm just trying to understand, right?
Sure.
Because there are three of you in the review panel,
Yeah.
and you had stated earlier that it's a consensus decision before it even goes up to the governor. So I'm just assuming that with three pairs of eyes, that the packet or the application package was reviewed thoroughly with due diligence, and before the governor could approve it, that everything was in place, and then the check will be printed. So,
By the way,
uh,
for the record, I violated my own, and I completely apologize. I was supposed to not speak to any specific applicant, but we're down so far down this river. I I hope we're okay with this discussion, but it's possible, ma'am, that it was deemed complete, right? And that it went up and someone caught it along the way, whether they're running the check and looking at the list again, which would be a great quality control within the administrator's prerogative, okay? And said, why did we process this when it's missing two items, and brought it to the attention of one of our members of the panel. And said, whoa, is it true there's a problem with this? Is it true it's incomplete? They held it. But the administrator, actually, I know I have a copy of the administrator's text where two or three others, DD marking, oh, it might be in the email, in a similar time frame email from Mr. Arroyo, that there are two or three others that have been deemed incomplete as well. And so all four were held back. There is an instance along the way, I don't know when, between August and November, that a double payment was issued, and that's probably because the same list was advanced because we didn't, we're working off an old list for a certain amount, right? It could have been cut and pasted. I don't know, but those are due to human errors and that have been corrected. That's why I was trying to follow you on your question about how do you recover monies. I know in the instances there's a quality control mechanism that one of the senior members of the bank would run. They keep a running ledger and they say, whoa, wait a minute, we got two checks, two awards. Is that intentional, or was there unnecessary carryover? And I'll be like, well, that's a great question. I don't know. I didn't even know we had given her a previous award. There's so many applicants that it's possible that that was just carried over, whether it's human error or not, and then we have to redress that. That's possible too, ma'am.
okay,
It's not
final and
common at
last
all.
question.
Okay.
Just for the record, your request to hold on to the check has nothing to do with personal or political matters going on during that time.
At no time in any instance is there a discussion about filial relationship, religious association, partisan membership, race, ethnicity, gender, age, or anything related to that. The short answer, so as a matter of fact, the definitive answer is no. And if it would serve the body well to know, I believe that I was a member of the panel who actually saw merit to advance and increase the award, notwithstanding whatever it is that may be floating out there, because the application itself was meritorious in the industry of Airbnb. As you may note, Jasea and every other provider out there, especially on Tinian and Rhoda, has identified that there are accommodation shortages for the projected growth in tourism. So
Thank you for your answer. That's all from me.
Thank you, Rep. Magofia. Any other members? I recognize Rep. Sablan.
Not to beat that dead horse, but just one more time. It is your testimony that your call to hold Miss Ogo's check had on October 28th, 2022, had nothing to do with her live Facebook event on October 28, 2022, around that time actually, 2 p.m., in which she exposed what she described as improprieties in the administration.
No. And I would submit for the record, to the best of my recollection, that that call in or that request via, I'm assuming this is WhatsApp or text, was done after only conferring with one or more members of the board, because I don't make unilateral decisions to effectuate a particular action. So I did confer with one or more members. And again, I hope it's an email. I'm sure it's an email if it's not here. The administrator, 20 minutes thereafter, had the same concern. And I don't know if it's related to the same batch. But since it was raised on the issue of what may be perceived as political retaliation due to a Facebook stream for or against the
On that
administration,
exact same day.
right?
Yeah.
Her award was actually increased. So I don't know if that helps or debunks that assertion. Not that it's yours, ma'am, but it's a legitimate question. I think in the
Mhm.
context of partisan affiliation.
Well, she also subsequently recanted her criticism, right?
Oh no, I don't.
Or retracted her criticism.
I didn't know that,
But-
and thank you.
But we can move on.
Does that apply
We
to
can
me too?
move
Because
on.
I'm not a follower.
We can move on. I just on the subject of the Farmer Fisher Rancher program, why were the criteria and the review process being developed so late in the game? On October 28th, Bank of Saipan was still asking you for criteria. The deadline was November 18, November 23rd. So after the deadline, you're giving guidance for how these applications should be reviewed. Why was this so late?
Probably the same reason. I would assume it's the same reason why Boost Small Business Nonprofit rolled out so late. There was so much work and so few people that lend itself to doing it. If in an ideal situation, we would have rolled out Small Business Nonprofit in March, as I was really pushing, and the record will reflect that. And then we can only handle so much at the same time. And so if I haven't even done that, it's probably an exercise I should do over the weekend. How much time had transpired between each program launching, and we're behind all the way. And um, beginning with small business nonprofit, and unfortunately, even the business center, which I was hoping would be made manifest by the Christmas season for small businesses to take hold of. So the exact reasons why, I don't know, but from my perspective, I would attribute it just because the wheels of government don't turn as fast as we would like it to. It may not be a satisfactory answer, ma'am, but it's my answer.
Was there any external event that caused the Bank of Saipan or the review panel to rush the distribution of checks around this time, October, November?
No. The short answer is no. I mean, I want to ask a follow-up, but I have an idea where you're going with this, but no, I don't believe so. As a matter of fact, it's still going on. I mean, if we followed that line of logic, and I'm still advocating and praying that it be made manifest in the incoming Palacios Apatang administration, especially the workforce, the Boost Small Business Center. It's a
But
great
as you know,
concept.
there isn't much money left.
I don't know that, but
We've established that there isn't much money left, right?
we as in the body, or we as in me and you?
In this record today and what's been reported so far.
I'm not fully aware, but I'll take your word for it.
Is it a
Congresswoman.
coincidence that most of the boost checks were issued right before and during the general and runoff elections?
I don't know. I numerically, empirically speaking, I don't know how many checks were issued, to be honest, and I'm
Mhm.
sure even more after the election. I think after the election, maybe several hundred, to include Fisher Farmers, were issued. I could be wrong, and if I am, I apologize. But I would venture out on a limb to say that there'll be even twice as many more checks issued, especially throughout the Boost program. I would hope so, at least, because that's the intent, is to stimulate the economy. And the holidays are here. Too bad we couldn't get the money out sooner.
Cam, could you pull up the exhibits, please? We'll start with the one about November 8th. The one about November 8th.
Is that more WhatsApp of me?
Could we just have a, yeah. No, yeah, it's not on November 8, Cam. It was about November 8.
I understand.
Okay,
It's in the JGO communications, which is in the right spot.
right, okay. Okay, yeah. So this is a communication, October 13. Sorry, Cam, could you move there? Thank you. October 13, 2022. A text message with Will Castro and Gina De Leon Guerrero, who works for the Bank of Saipan. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that. Yes.
So this is a message from Will Castro. I'll just read into the record. Promise it'll be easier after November 98. Looks like a smiling emoji, and then a correction, November 8. So there's that. And can we go on to the next exhibit, Cam, about the FFR checks? Okay, so this, maybe scroll up a little bit more. Okay, so this is the guidance that you issued, Mr. Castro, on November 23rd to the Bank of Saipan. And the goal that you outlined here for November 24th was to issue 200 checks to Saipan residents, 100 checks to Rota residents, 100 checks to Tinian residents, and then on November 25th, issue 200 checks to Saipan residents, 100 checks to Rota residents, and 100 checks to Tinian residents. And as we know, November 8th was the date of the general election, and November 25th was the date of the runoff election. And it, these communications, and there are other references to the election in other communications, and they certainly suggest strongly that boost decisions were being made with the election in mind. So I guess my next question is, did any of the people involved in the decision making, yourself included, participate in the governor's re-election campaign?
Yes, I participated in the governor's reelection. May I speak to the two assertions on November 8th?
What was your role in the governor's election?
I was the campaign manager for the Torres Blonde campaign.
Okay. And what about the other members of the review panel? David Atzilig, Edward De Leon Guerrero.
No, Mr. Atalik, to the best of my knowledge, does not have an official role in the governor's campaign
Did he
or in the Republican
participate
Party.
in the governor's re-election campaign?
I'm pretty sure, to the best of my knowledge and recollection, he may have attended an event or two.
And what about Mr. De Leon Guerrero from the Department of Commerce?
Mr. De Leon Guerrero has, to the best of my knowledge and recollection, has attended several more events than Mr. Atalik.
And what about Mr. Taisigui?
Mr. Taisigui also has had an active role, yes.
And what about Shane Villanueva?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, can we pull up the next exhibit? The newspaper article, Cam. Okay, so here we have, so this is an article dated November 17, 2022, from the Variety. Fishermen, farmers, ranchers encouraged to apply for Boost. Sorry, could we get to the part regarding the governor's rule? Okay. Yeah, enlarge that, please, so we can read it. So the governor here is quoted as having said that he's not personally involved in the approval of applications, and that there's a panel of reviewers whose members are with the Bank of Saipan and the CNMI Department of Commerce. So would you agree, Mr. Castro, that the statements attributed to the governor in this article conflict with your description of the Booth's decision-making process?
First of all, I don't. It's not a direct quote. I see it as a summarized statement of what the governor may have said. Um, the record will reflect that the governor is the ultimate approving authority. I have heard him say that he does not go through and selectively approve individual applications, that in fact he relies heavily upon the advice of the panel.
Mhm.
I would think in this context, that's what he's meaning, unless this is the FFR. So if I haven't read the article, but going to the headline, if it is the Fisher Farmer Rancher Program,
Mhm.
there is no room necessarily for selective application of these awards. They're almost sequential, unless someone fell out of the line because you didn't qualify.
You're talking about this assistance
Yes, ma'am. And I think, is that the title of the
Program.
article?
November 17th.
If you scroll to the top, I don't know the title. I didn't read that article.
Mhm.
There you go. So Fisher Farmers Ranchers encouraged to apply. So the governor basically, well, he has to approve the expenditure unless he delegated that to Dave. But this particular program doesn't go through a review process like the other programs do.
But
On
this wasn't just the subsistence program. There's also the commercial program, which did go through the review process.
which does,
And which the governor would have to personally approve.
yes,
Right.
on the list, right?
Okay.
And again, forgive me, I didn't read this article, but I was
Yeah. But you've been pretty consistent in saying that the governor has final approval for boost grant applications for businesses, for nonprofits. He has the final say, right? Were there any criteria that the governor used in deciding whether to approve an application that the review panel had recommended?
gosh, I can only imagine the thought process he goes through, but he, like every other member of the panel, to include the administrator, are fully cognizant of the basic considerations outlined in either the rubric or that guiding document that I referred to. Um, One thing I can say, forgive me for being a little more opinionated and subjective about the chief executive, is that Governor Torres places a lot of trust. He operates from a very laissez-faire perspective. He trusts his cabinet and his advisors to do what's in the best interest of the Commonwealth. And so, in almost every instance, to the best of my knowledge, if a list had been advanced, the assumption is that it had been properly vetted and thoroughly discussed, and as such, he would approve it.
Mhm. Was there any record kept of the governor's decision-making process for approving applications?
Yeah, so yes, once the governor approves, he remits it and it goes to John Arroyo. And I think he reflects this in his record that the governor has approved that list at that time.
But it was just the record of whether he approved it or not,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
But not how he approved it, how he arrived at that decision of whether to approve or not.
You mean like what his thoughts were?
Like there's no criteria.
I don't. The short answer is the record that is submitted to Mr. Arroyo is the record of the list of recommended entities and the amount recommended for approval
Mhm.
that he subsequently acts upon.
And
I'm not aware, but that's not to say there isn't,
mhm.
as to whether the governor took personal or notes on his own volition and individually weighted those companies. I'm not aware, to the best of my knowledge or recollection.
And would you help us understand why the governor played a role in approving these applications? If there was an administrator, a third-party administrator for the program, there's a review panel consisting of 3 individuals who were appointed by the governor and report to the governor. Why did he even have to be involved in saying yes or no?
I can't speak to the law, but if I can share my thoughts, I would think that while you can delegate your responsibility or some parts of your duties, you can never fully discharge your fiduciary duty to the people as made manifest in whether it's a federal rule or by the covenant. So at the end of the day, whether he allowed you or me to make a decision on his behalf, the buck stops with him and he's held liable in his capacity as chief executive and the only sole authorized authority to expend these funds on behalf of the people. I would have to assume all that to be true. Some things you can delegate and some things you can't.
Hmm. And can you think of any other grant, any other program operated by the government in which the governor plays such a direct and active role in deciding how public funds should be distributed in these types of grants?
I could think of similar ones, yes. And I can give a similar example from other jurisdictions where the governor has delegated but cannot shirk or abrogate his ultimate fiduciary responsibility in the context of Title 5A.
Hmm.
Usually, so that would be my short answer. I would have to assume that every grant that comes through that's federally authored by the state bears his signature, whether he delegates it or not.
But we're talking about, I mean, basically like sub grants, right?
We're talking about
There's like the grant to the Commonwealth, and then there are these sub grants to these beneficiaries, right?
so the yes, ma'am, and to compare the apple to the apple, the ARPA, CLSFR, whatever the designation is, would be the apple to Title 5A as an example, awarded to the state. That would be the secondary something award to the state that's usually discharged to the Department of Education, which is further delegated to the superintendent, in this case, your commissioner, and further delegated to the Division of Federal Affairs.
Do you see how though the inclusion of the governor in this process, the boost process, gives at least the appearance of political influence?
I can see how it can be seen, and that's why there were overt attempts to establish a rubric and even a series of processes to sort of mitigate that, if you will. That's my opinion. So there, prior to just to be clear, this money could be discharged by the governor upon his sole authority and discretion in a manner he sees fit that's consistent with federal and local statute and all applicable rules. But he chose to allow this program that has a series of steps from the utilization of a third party with the subject matter expertise and infrastructure within it to the best of their ability and with the confidence that the governor has, I would assume,
Mhm.
to vet these applications and then to assemble a team of advisors that could further look at these applications in the context of the priorities of the Commonwealth as he defines them to be, in this case, the diversification of the economy and emphases on one or more industries, and then make the best possible recommendation in the interest of the Commonwealth to him as his final signatory. Yes,
Okay.
I could see that happening.
So you would agree then that the person with the ultimate responsibility for the expenditures of these public funds is the governor.
Yes, I believe that to be true.
And you would also then agree that the best person for this body to call in to answer questions about this program and the expenditures of these public funds would be the governor.
You're asking me if you should bring the governor in here to answer questions about Boost?
Would he be the best person to answer our questions?
Uh, if you wanted to discern the intent of the program, yes, ma'am. But in terms of promulgation of the program, the best person to ask about the operational administrative aspect of the program would be the person that has been consigned to discharge those duties. In this case, the administrator, which happens to be the Bank of Saipan.
But it
If-
appears that the administrator's role really has just been to ensure this checklist is completed, right? That they're all the requested or the items for submission were complied with and the applications are complete before they give them to the review panel. That's all the administrator does.
I think there's a little bit more than that. And as it's oversimplified as that sounds, there's a lot of due diligence in that. There's
I
also
would
the
hope so.
execution, the notification, the follow-up, and I would have to assume there are federal rules and regulations that apply to when you cut a check and
Mhm.
under what conditions. I wouldn't know what they are. But if I could finish, the best person, in my opinion, not to discount the knowledge of the governor, but the best person to ask about the administrative and operational aspect of Boost would be the person whose duty it is to discharge that. That would be the administrator. The
Okay.
best person to ask about the fiscal fiduciary aspect of the discharge of these public funds would be the Secretary of Finance. He's been delegated that authority and
Mhm.
entrusted with that authority. If you wanted my opinion, which we asked more than my opinion about the review process, I'm one of 3 individuals on the panel, but in good faith and in the spirit of cooperation, I'm attempting to answer these questions, which have nothing to do necessarily directly with what I do in the panel. If you want to talk about the panel, which we've been doing, I can help. I would love to provide my
Mm.
opinion. But
And if
these two,
we had questions about how, like, because there's no record, right? There's no record of how applications were evaluated, how applications were rated even, or even that, or whether they were even rated before they went to the governor. Ultimately, he approved all of them. Like, I guess that is my only point. It does sound like there are at least some questions that only the governor would be able to answer. But we can move on.
thank you.
My next question is, was there a preliminary list?
Could you define preliminary list?
That is a term that I believe you may have used
Okay.
in your own correspondence.
And if you
A
could refer,
preliminary list of applicants that
you mean like a list that came from the bank that we consider preliminary?
that you had before awards were made.
Like a working list?
Was there any preliminary list?
I never, if I use that term, I'm sorry. Sankar, could you just show that to me? I know we use a working spreadsheet
Yeah.
where we compile the list.
Cam, could you bring up the exhibit?
As a matter of housekeeping, Madam Chair, I don't mind continuing. I just need 15 minutes to send a very critical email, as I asked right after lunch. I don't want to break your train of thought. We can finish that. I just have a very critical email. I can
Sure.
step away after this.
I think we're almost done.
Are you sure? It doesn't feel like it.
Let's take a short break. Let's take a short break.
Breaky. Are we off the air?
No,
Oh, sorry.
there's on it.
Mhm.
I didn't mean to disrupt you.
That's it.
Talking about the message.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is where we need to-
We'll take that recess in the next 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, text message. September 30th, you said.
All right.
September 30th? Okay.
My
September
apologies. We'll go ahead and.
30th.
How much time you need, Mr. Castro? Yes. Yes.
But I think this could be I know there might be a follow-up question. We want to dispose of this question in break.
All right.
We're trying.
Yeah, no, we're just trying to get to that portion of the message exchange. Uh, should be there. All right. Rep Sablon, you still have the floor.
Thank you. So, sorry, could you just, oh, thank you. Okay. So this is a message dated September 30, 2022 from yourself, Will Castro, to John Arroyo. And you say, we have a prelim list. Well, that's what you say. What was that prelim list?
Excuse me. So without having the full context, I'll attempt to answer this question, noting the time, September 30, and noting the subsequent discussion or back and forth about needing a logo. To the best of my knowledge and recollection, this list was derived from the early stacks of the applications in the early days. Forgive my being so colloquial. It was easy to sit down and read like 30 to 50 applications page by page. It was really manageable. And at that time, we assembled. It was like, wow, we just started this program. We're very zealous, and so we were saying, oh, this looks great. Hey, looks like a good submission. But we that's what this list would be. Hey, what do you think about this? Yeah, let's consider it. So we developed. I don't even remember how we manifested this. If it was written down or an email, whatever. But if you look, it says we want to make sure that whatever it is that was submitted in writing to us, because the bank at that time, if I'm not mistaken, was presenting like actual hard copies. I mean, you can imagine it was like this thick. Now there's an entire room you can't even move. Um, and so it's saying, hey, we've done our homework. Can you make sure that you do the due diligence? We don't want to misstep. Like, is what's in there also covered in all the respective attachments? And then let's formalize it. So that's why I don't even know where this is at, but I'm going to assume that this is around the time of what you can call the God. There was a term for this, a test run, and I don't know, it was some kind of test run. It was designed to select meritorious applications for an early run to smooth out the kinks so that if it was received, did the bank handle it well? Did we notify? Are we missing something? It was kind of formative in nature. That's what I think this is. I could be wrong.
Well, no, it doesn't sound like that's the same thing
Okay.
as what this is. Because I saw the other correspondence about the test run and the test batch, and we'll have questions for that
Okay.
about that later, I think. But this is a preliminary list from September 30, and you asked to see their attachments. You didn't have their applications. John said he'll send you their applications, and so I guess my question now is, who was on the preliminary list? How were they selected for the preliminary list, and who prepared the preliminary list?
Yes, man, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't necessarily share the same opinion, but we can leave that on the table. And I can do additional homework on this because the record is static. I have an email record on around the same time that's already been printed and provided to the committee. Again, I stand by the notion that either a cover letter or something was submitted for the committee to have reviewed. And it may or may not have been complete, depending on, I can't recall exactly when it started to crystallize, like the process, right? But I'm assuming here, since it's only September, that in our zealousness, we were excited in reviewing whatever was submitted. But like I said, remember I gave you the compliance rate for the ROTA submissions as an example. There may have been a cover letter, or there may have been a business plan, but no cover letter. It's like a mix and match.
Okay. I recognize that you have submitted other documents as of today in your efforts to comply with the subpoena ducis tecum. Could you verify whether that
Sure.
preliminary list is part of it? And I mean, you don't have to do it right now. I know we're going to take a break.
I appreciate that.
So, but I would like to see that preliminary list.
Yes, ma'am. And also, I just want to say, for the record and for your benefit, that the council, I don't know if you got the permit. Did I give you the permission? Well, I'm sorry, that sounds wrong. I sent you the link, and you should have full access and privileges to this Google Drive. If you go outside the Google Drive, it's family pictures, please refrain. But there's this Google Drive with a folder that has everything that I download, that I've saved to PDF from like February to November 18th, whatever, so that it's there and there's a physical copy there, just in good faith, so you know that something's not going to be there and not be there. It's all there. Okay, so I hope I'll be able to satisfy your inquiry at the appropriate time, Congresswoman.
Thank you. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Zamlan. At this time, we'll take that 20-minute break
Thank you.
and be back at, well, let's be back at 4:55. Short recess.
Thank you.
So prior to the recess, we finished up with Rep Sablan. Um, in regards to her questions regarding a preliminary list. After speaking with members of the committee and understanding that there are several follow up questions, at this time we will recess until Monday morning at 10 a.m. So that we can allow members to um, ask their follow up questions as I've um, requested for them to make note of any follow up questions that they would like to bring up. Um, and so, with that, again, Mr. Castro, we thank you for your time today. We thank you for sharing the documents you provided the committee, as well as the electronic copies that you shared with council. If members, I believe members have already begun requesting access to that document. And so, if you can review that and see if that's something you'd like to share with the rest of the members. And so at this time, you are excused for today, but we ask that you come back Monday at 10 a.m. Thank you. And so with that, members, we will come back at 10 a.m. And depending on how quickly we get through Mr. Castro, that will determine when we will call our next witness up. Um, Provided that we give them ample time to make it up here. And I know we have a session on Monday, and so uh, that the next witness will be determined after Mr. Castro on Monday. And if there's nothing else, members, we will recess. We'll now take a recess until 10 a.m. Monday morning.